All right, we've got a device that is sent here with a complaint from one of our former micro soldering students, Chase. And he said, please do a video. I know I'm missing something simple and I'm just dying to know what it is. Let's start with his note. So Chase tells us that he's got an iPhone 7 here that has a 0 ohm short on VDD main. And I checked and he's right. So good job, Chase. And then he says that the short is not creating heat. So normally we expect that when a capacitor or a chip has failed, so it's become a wire to ground, that usually creates a really thin little wire like inside a capacitor or inside a chip that will then get hot when we apply a voltage to that circuit. And it'll light up like a light bulb. And that's one of the main ways that we go about detecting the cause of short circuits. But Chase is saying this one's not getting hot. So he says that it's not creating heat, so he pulled and replaced capacitors that are along the top of the board, and up the top of the board is up here. These are some common spots where water damage can affect an iPhone 7. So he tried those, and he then pulled the MOSFET between main and battery. So he was eliminating variables. He took off the MOSFET, and the MOSFET is normally right here, and we can see that it's missing here. And that MOSFET will get hot because itself is a thin wire connecting battery VCC and main when you inject voltage through the battery. So he eliminated that, and then he, then he injected voltage in multiple places on VDD main, and he couldn't find a hot spot. So he pulled the caps that he had replaced back off, which is a good idea, along the top to eliminate the possibility of a short by my doing. So Chase, I think you're on the right track. That's what I would do as well. When you take off a capacitor like around here, and you replace it, but you put one back on, then you never know if maybe underneath the capacitor that you replaced, maybe you kind of made a little bridge of solder. So you actually created a main short while replacing the cap. So don't replace anything until you have absolutely cleared your short according to your multimeter. So he went back, took off all of those caps to make sure that he hadn't inadvertently created a second short. And he continued searching to no avail. So he pulled a few more capacitors as I was losing sanity, and now I'm stumped. So I'm sending it into you, hoping it's an easy, dumb thing I was missing. Please do a video. I'm dying to know what I missed. All right, Chase. I don't know where your short is, but I will walk you and anybody else that has ever struggled with this problem how I would approach a board. So when I can't find heat, and I will look for heat with a lot of effort, because usually you can find that the failed component has created a thin wire and it will get hot. And the tool that I use for that is the Seek Compact Pro from the iPad Rehab store with the iPad Rehab macro lens. This is the best tool for detecting heat. And if it's a main short, so my multimeter says there's a short on main, then I'll use this sort of like tap, tap, tap at the DC power supply, where I will try to get the heat to blink and call my attention to that. So you did the same thing, I'm sure. When you can't find heat, then that means that for whatever reason your short isn't a thin wire, your short is a thick wire. So then we have to think, what kind of problems would make a thick wire? Because a thick wire is not going to get hot. So you remember from class, the example that I usually use when we're talking about short detection is if I were to connect between my positive and negative leads here, if I were to connect a thin wire like we do in class, that generates so much heat when it completes the circuit that the thin wire will actually puff into smoke because it's so hot. But you can take a thick wire, like connecting through a big thick pair of tweezers, and you can actually hold this short circuit right here in the middle. It's never going to get hot because the wire is thick. So if you don't see heat, probably what's going on is you have a thick wire. Now we're always going to start by making sure that we're looking for a short that's actually short and not some kind of a troll. So step one I'm going to do on your board here is I'm going to confirm what you told me is that you actually have a short on VDD main. So the place that I look for VDD main to measure on the iPhone 7 is right here, this little diamond thing right here. Now, this really catches my eye because look at that. There is frank corrosion. Could this amount of corrosion be creating that sort of thick wire? Yeah, it could, right? Your short might well be just the goop. Look at that. You've got ground, and then here's your, man, this is hard to be a weatherman. You've got your VDD main and ground. Could your short be just the goo? Yeah, it could. So you want to kind of use that crisp visual exam. Let's start with a multimeter and find out, is this line actually short? So diode mode, red probe on ground, VDD main is 0.000 using the iPad Rehab Trust based multimeter. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do to this board is I am going to just make sure that this whole thing isn't just a matter of a little bit of snot on the board. So I'm going to just clean that off with a Q-tip and alcohol. Now let's go back. Is that short still there? Man, that would be really funny. I mean, that would be something if it was not. Survey says red probe on ground, still short. Okay, so that's the first thing that I would do is I would look for, reasons why you have you're sort of missing your heat. All right. Now, the next thing I'm going to do on this board is I am going to look together with you and everybody else to see whether or not maybe you were using some other type of camera and maybe you overlooked some heat. So we are going to take a look. And I can see this is live, so I see some folks from chat watching from Trinidad and wherever Cape Town Sea Point is. Hello everybody. So what I've done to this board so far is simply put a wire on a good spot here on VDD main. All right, so we've put a wire on VDD main. So we're going to use that spot to inject just 1 volt or even less. I don't need to inject 4 volts onto main. I can inject 1 or 2 or 3. It doesn't matter as long as I have not exceeded the voltage that this line can take, which is about 5 or 6 volts. All right, so I'm going to connect my DC power supply up a bed. All right. Hello from Stirling, Scotland. It is quite the UN in here today. All right, so we're going to connect positive right here. So we're just connecting DC power supply. Now the reason I'm choosing to inject just 1 volt instead of 4 volts is because I am expecting that my wire is probably this wire right here. That wire, the thinnest wire, is going to get hot. Probably if there's a big short, a big blob somewhere, then my wire is going to be the thinnest wire. So it's going to get hot, and that might make it hard for me to see. So for that reason, I'm going to lower my voltage down so that I'm really just injecting the minimum necessary. Okay, so I've made my connection to ground. I can hear the fan come on my DC power supply, so I'm ready to look for heat. So let's pull up our thermal camera. So the teaching thermal is this guy here. This is the Qianli Supercam, which is the sort of device I love to hate, but it does well for teaching. Let's move it over, and hopefully it'll work for us today. Okay, so now without injecting anything, so I'm holding the lead right here in my hand, ready to complete the circuit by plugging it into DC power. So just looking at this device kind of as it is, you can see that there's like a reflection from the sensor there on the audio IC. And as we kind of like look around, there's like, hot spots that are just reflections back to the sensor itself. All right, so now let's plug in to DC power. So we're injecting into our short, and we see something getting hot. And what is it? That is indeed our wire. Let's see if we can look at both of these at the same time. I don't think we can be so lucky as to get both of them at the same time. But the thing that was getting hot was our wire right there, as expected, right? Maybe I can even take that voltage down to a little bit less, just to try to give the real short a chance to, to show itself without just our eyes focusing right on that hot wire. So let's bring back our thermal camera and let's see, does anybody have any idea in chat where might there be a mysterious short that is on the iPhone 7? Let's pull this around so that it will be kind of a match. All right, let's start here at the end of the board, plugging this in now. And let's see, what do we see getting hot? Just our wire, so we're gonna ignore our wire and we're gonna keep looking. All right, so now when we kind of look like, oh, I see, is that something? I don't know, because it's hard to tell the reflection to the sensor that's always gonna be there a little bit from heat from the short. So that's why on a VDD main short, I like being able to do the tap, tap, right? So I'm gonna disconnect, now I'm gonna go tap, 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 and I'm looking to see, do I see something that is, blinking in concert with me tapping on the DC power supply, right? So right now I see something. I don't think it looks like a short. Maybe it is, but we can see a little spot of heat, right? We can see, let's see if we can kind of put our tweezer on it, right? Right around here. Maybe we'll take this down a little bit. And you can play around by lowering your voltage or raising your voltage. Yeah, there looks like maybe there's something right there. It's kind of like put my finger there, which is kind of hot, and that will change the way that these cameras will range. Yeah, see right there? Let's investigate what is that spot there. All right, let's just see what that is. All right, so let's go back to the microscope and see what you guys think. And we'll bring the microscope over and we'll say, what is right there? So in the area that seemed to be like maybe a hot spot, we see this thing right there. Well, that doesn't look like a capacitor, and it doesn't look like a chip. It looks like a coil. Now, coils are just wires, so there's no way that a coil could ever be the cause of a short circuit to ground. So just for fun, let's look it up just to be sure, because again, we're only looking for something that is inappropriately connecting to ground on VDD main. So what is this thing? Just for fun, the less we fix, the more we learn. So let's go ahead and look up on ZXW and say, what is this guy? It's on the back side of the board, and it is a coil. It's this guy, L1802. Now let's see, is this side on main? That side is on a line called Buck 9 FB, and this is on Buck 9 LX0. So this guy here doesn't have anything to do with main. And we can prove that by clicking back over to main. Here's our little VDD main diamond shaped spot. Now we can see highlighted everything that's in VDD main. And now let's look back. And yeah, that guy that was sort of getting hot is not actually on VDD main. So what was that? That was just a reflection. Something weird about the way that coil reflects back to the sensor. So we're going to say that's a troll, and we are going to ignore that, and we're going to continue to say, do we see anything that is actually getting hot? So let's go back and let's bring that back and bring that back. No heat, usually icy fault or very large cap. We'll see. No heat means something big, right? But when you get into kind of a situation where you've been working on a board, then it can be sometimes something that you created, all right? So now we can clearly see, that's the sensor. Look at that. So let's do our tap, tap, tap. When we're like, we can kind of situate the sensor right on top of the audio IC. Is the audio IC getting hot? Tap, tap, tap. No, that's just the sensor, right? We can even move that around. So we are not seeing any heat. So I agree with Chase as we move down the board, looking for heat. Tap, tap, tap. We don't see anything getting hot. All right, let's go here. Tap, tap, tap. All right, now let's flip the board over and we'll look on the other side, but I agree with you, Chase. I also don't see any heat. Tap, tap. Nothing up there. Tap, tap. Just there's our wire. Let's see. I enjoy fixing stuff. It's like detective work, says Sal. I agree. It is continued to be fun. Every day is a new problem, and it is. I've been doing it for now, gosh, is it been 10 years? It's almost 10 years, if not 10 years. And it's just as fun as the first day. Like, it's always new problems, always fun. All right. Okay, so now I agree. I just see our hot wire. Let's move our wire kind of out of the frame of the camera so we can look. Tap, tap. All I see is the sensor. Okay, so I agree with you, Chase. So far, we don't see any sign of heat that maybe you overlooked. So what's up with that? Let's put the thermal camera away. And let's bring back the microscope so we don't need that anymore. Okay, so now we have either a fault that's so large that maybe under a chip, a main ball and a ground ball got so hot that they blobbed together. That would make a thick wire, and therefore it wouldn't get hot. So it could be something like that. Or we could have something where somewhere a main pad on the board is scratched or something where it's now touching ground and we have like a physical connection to ground. So let's use just the clues of physical observation to try to see if we can come up with any reason where there would be a big wire. And I don't know the answer to this. So this is live and we're kind of following this together. So I am just showing you how I would look for a short on a board that doesn't get hot. Jessa, what is the current consumption on your DC power supply? That's a good question. So the current consumption is something that the board decides, and you can set a limit, but you can't like feed the board current any more than you can feed a baby peas. You can give the baby peas, but that baby's going to decide how many peas it eats. So this board decides what current it's going to consume, and I've set a limit. And the limit that I've set, I don't even remember. It's probably something like 2.5 to 3 amps. We can find out. Click. Let's answer that. This board, I've set a limit of 2 or 3 amps. And then the board is consuming 1.8 amps at 1 volt. So that's the answer to that. Okay. Yeah, what is the current consumption? All of it. All right. Actually, no, because I've turned it down to 1 volt, so not quite all of it. All right, now let's use our eyes to try to come up with, what is our explanation? So it may well be that Chase had a conventional short circuit that was a capacitor early on. He cleared that, he removed it, and then he created some sort of second short circuit in working over the device, because he did say that he originally took off caps and then replaced them, which is not recommended, as he knows. All right, so now we will look around. So we've got, let's look very closely. So we'll look together, and I'm not too concerned about, this little blob of excess heat up here because there's no VCC main up in this area. And now I see that we are missing this guy up here. So we're missing a guy, we're missing a couple of these dudes up here, and I can see why we are missing this. This is something that Chase would have removed. Why is that? Because it is near where, I don't know where Chase soldered a wire, but he did say, I soldered a wire in multiple places to inject, in multiple places. Good idea, Chase, because I've done it before. If you solder a wire to the short component, then it'll look like your wire's getting hot, but it's really you were unlucky and you soldered the wire to the shorted component. So it does make sense to try a couple different places on VCC main, so that makes sense. And let's go ahead and get rid of our wire to sort of desolder that. And now I can see that if Chase also happened to solder a wire up there, then when the wire is getting hot, you kind of want to convince yourself, oh, maybe it's not the wire, maybe it's the thing right there in that area. And I can see why you might think that. So let's look up who is this guy that Chase has deleted and see if it makes sense. So let's go on a hunt. I'm very pleased to see that former student Chase has used his training pretty well here, and he's not doing anything so far that has embarrassed me. Good job, Chase. All right, so M2600 is indeed a chip that has a lot of ground and it has some VDD main. So it does make sense that maybe this chip overheated, and if it did, then it could cause that main ball to swell and blob together to the adjacent ground ball. That would do it. That makes sense. So I can see why Chase would have taken M2600 off the board. All right, so now let's look back at that. And, oh, did you guys see that? ZXW, did I have that up? Here it is, M2600. I don't think I had that on the stream. And it does indeed have main right next to ground in a couple of places. So could have been the fault. So it makes sense that if he saw some heat that he thought was probably the wire, he's just going to take that off to rule it out. So let's go ahead and close this. So now we're left with the possibility, well, what if in taking off that component, the pads underneath bridge together? Let's look very, very closely then and see if that is the case. All right, so we're looking very, very, very closely, and we can see something. This is what I would be looking for, right? Look at this right here. This is the kind of stuff that can really get you in trouble. Look right here, A and B, A and B. Those guys are connected, right? That is not supposed to be like that. Probably they're both ground, and it's not relevant to our problem. But if one of those guys was your main pad and the next guy was ground, then just simply kind of going like that with your iron, you have to really look for that. That would be a thick wire, you know, compared to an inside of a tiny dead capacitor. This spot right there, see it? Ding, 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 right there. That is thick, and it would not be expected to generate heat. All right, so let's rule it out. How are we going to do that? You know, we could look it up, but we'd have to count all these pads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply eliminate that bridge by going over it with some iron and flux. Flux is the antidote to any kind of bridge. So we will just say, let's make sure that we haven't inadvertently created any kind of a main short. I just am going over that guy. Okay. So now, wherever that bridge, I don't even remember, but now it's certainly gone. And we can look with like our super close X-ray vision to say, are there any other bridges? No. Now you have to be careful, because some places, if we sort of read the board, some places are already connected because they're on the same circuit. Here's an example right here. Look at this. We have A and B pads. Read the board there. See how there's like a little, maybe it's too hard for you guys to see on YouTube, but right there at that spot, if we read the board, we can see a little bit of tan painted right there. See that? These two are already, oh man, that is hard. A and B. These two, look at that little tan connection. There's another one right here. There, these two guys. There's a little bit of tan painted copper because those two pads are already one piece of metal in the board. So they're meant to be connected. So if you gloss over that enough, you might rub away that paint and then they will become tinned. That's not a short. That's just what happens when you erase that conformal coating that covers up those, right? So don't try to clear shorts that aren't actually shorts. That's different than the little bridge that we used to have down there. All right, did that clear our main short? I don't think so, but it's worth a shot to go ahead and go back to the multimeter. So we'll know whether we cleared our short with the multimeter not with heat. All right, red probe on ground, and we still have our short. So we've ruled that out, and we're going to continue to look for other similar things like that. So let's go back to the top of the board, and we'll see what's up. All right, so I see Chris Long is in chat talking about what we're doing. We are looking for what could be the reason why we have a thick wire connecting main to ground somewhere along here. All right, so we can see that there's some little signs of kind of too much heat on the board, a little bit of solder right here, these little Mickey Mouse ears that tell us that there was some heat up here. Here's a little solder ball there. So that means when we see that sort of signs of excess heat, it means that if we have a nearby chip that is underfilled, like this speaker amp here, what if the heat just from trying to take off that top shield kind of overheated the corner of the board right here? Could that cause, under that chip, for the main ball and ground ball to fuse together? Yes, if that actually has a connection to main. So let's check, and we'll kind of check there on ZXW. ZXW tell us about the speaker amp, and indeed the speaker amp U3301 does here at A5 have a main ball, which could be now bridged to the ground ball. And why do we think that? Because we see on our visual exam, we're talking about, could we have our short be under this chip here? Could be, because we see these tiny hints of a little bit of too much heat, probably from Chase taking that top shield off. Normally, I leave the top shield on. I leave all the shields on as much as I can, but like Chase, I too would have removed this top shield if I didn't see any heat earlier, because the shield's going to do its job, dissipate the heat. So you can't see heat under shields. So this is a possibility. Our short may be under this speaker amp chip, but we're going to look for other things first and come back to that. All right, looking around here, nothing's jumping out at me. Nothing's jumping out at me in this area. All right, let's go to the other side of the board and see what we can find. All right, so we've got some ugliness around here. This guy right here, this little square dude, looks a little bit maybe not perfectly flat and flush, so it kind of makes me wonder, is this a place where maybe Chase lifted something up and put it back down? And if so, he could have created a main short by pressing down accidentally and blobbing together, but only if right here, if that guy actually is on main. And I kind of don't think he is. I think he's a camera dude, but I don't really remember. I don't think I've ever dealt with him. But let's look him up. So this is just kind of showing you guys how I would approach a board like this. Let's say flipping on the other side of the board, and we're talking about this little square guy here. Is he on main? Answer, no. All right, VDD boost. So this guy could not possibly, even if he was smashed a little bit, doesn't matter, because he would not create a main short. So we're going to say that's not it either. So let's go back to the board. All right, let's keep looking. So we're going to say not concerned there. All right, I've got my little signs of excess heat right here. Could there be a short under the Wi-Fi chip? It could be, because main does go under there. We'll put that on our, come back to later list if we don't see anything else. All right, we don't expect any of these capacitors to be short, because they definitely would have shown up for heat. Now we're down here in an area that Chase has already been before us. So let's look and say, did Chase accidentally, blob together, something like this, like a main pad to a ground pad with just a tiny speck of solder as he was reworking and removing things and replacing things in this area? And I don't think so. I don't see anything here that looks like it could possibly be connected. All right, now we get here to the baseband, the Intel baseband PMU, and since he was kind of working in this area, it's possible this guy's not underfilled, which means that if Chase was using hot air to remove these caps or replace caps, then he might have nudged this chip. And in doing so, he could have created that big wire of a main ball bridging to a ground ball. So let's look and say, does that chip look like it could have been touched or lopsided or anything like that? And the answer is I don't see any obvious signs, so we'll put that as a maybe, and we'll come back to that one as well. I don't think there was any work done over here at Audio IC, so that's kind of unlikely. And there's no main around the NAND. And let's look in here. So I see some flux around this area, and he's telling me that he took off the MOSFET on purpose. So it's possible, again, here in this area that maybe just a tweezer slip, and if you have hot air there and you just can touch this chip on the top, you could smash it down and create a big blob there. So that's a possibility as well. And looking around here, I see again, there's sort of this like, you see that? We got some higher heat than normal down here. And we're not sure why. That was just sort of, I'm not sure what Chase was doing down here that would have made that heat. So it is possible. Sometimes when you see the little Mickey Mouse ears, that sometimes, rarely, sometimes it happens natively. And it's a sign that your short's going to be around here because that's where it got hot. So I don't know if this was something, this little heat here is something that happened from, I don't know what, you know, hot air over here, taking off the MOSFET or something like that. It's a little bit far away. So I'm just going to sort of note that. Now let's look on this side of the board. And I see that we have some solder marks here on the battery connector. So that tells me that Chase was soldering wires to the battery connector at some point in order to inject a voltage. Here's something that would jump out at me on my visual exam. You got a solder ball right there. So something like this kind of stuff can cause weird shorts that don't make heat. Now, I don't think this is actually the cause of the short, but it's something that you should notice. Because what if this guy here was a main capacitor and just that big piece of metal, that solder ball, was connecting, you know, main to ground? Then that could be the cause, right? I don't think this is a main cap, and I don't think that that solder ball is actually touching. So we'll just delete it. But just to be sure, we'll make sure that our main short is still there, and it wasn't that guy. Main short still there. All right, so we will kind of note that means that we had a lot of heat here. So let's look up this guy, since he pooped out a solder ball and he probably got pretty hot. And if that guy has a main ball right there, then our short is probably under him. So let's take a look at ZXW and see what we can find there. So ZXW, tell us, if we go down to the bottom of the phone, flip it over, and we take a look down here. Do we have main at this guy where our solder ball was? Answer, no. All right, so that's not it. Now, but let's kind of look here in this area. Looking closely in this area, we can see that we have a lot of main around this guy, M2800. So let's look back at the board and see what we think right there. So let's go, there we go, got rid of ZXW. And we'll flip it around to match the ZXW orientation. Okay, so now I can see that there is a lot of main under this guy, and there's a lot of ground. This is our coil array chip, Nicky or whatever it's called in the iPhone 7. So inside here are your backlight coil, your charging coil, some speaker amp coil. They're all mashed together in here, and then they're just poured, like ground is poured all around them. Now coils, since they themselves are never on ground, they don't have any way to like dissipate their heat very well. So when you heat up this chip, then you're really at risk of just bulging out some solder under the chip, which is then going to very easily connect to ground. So let's look on ZXW so you can see what I mean by that. Here's that same chip, right? So if you imagine, you know, that here inside this chip is a speaker amp coil right there, those pads. And then this guy here is another speaker amp coil. See this little coil? And if we were to shave it down with a razor, we could actually see that coil. It's part of the chip. And then here, there's a big coil. This is your backlight coil inside M2800. And then over here, we have our selfie flash, a little mini backlight coil. And then down here, we have a charging coil. So we've got 1, 2, big one, 3, 4, 5 coils that everything else is just ground. And you can see how much of this is main. So a lot of it is main. So if we put heat in this area, it's really easy to create just a bulge under that chip that will then connect to ground. And that would form a big wire. Or even inside the chip, you know, those coils just swell up and just, you know, poop out a little bit of solder that then touches ground. That, to me, of all the things that we've seen on this board, right now, this is most likely the cause of the main short. And I appreciate that this shield here appears to have never been taken off, which is exactly what I would advise. Don't take this guy off, because taking this guy off is really aggressive. And underneath there's not very many chips that can cause problems. It's just a bunch of baseband chips that are not BGA chips, so water can't really go under them because they're flat onto the board. So I don't take this chip off, or this shield off, because I don't want to overheat this guy, because this guy causes main shorts. Now let's look. Oh, here's a big tell. Look right here. Right here. This is what jumps out to me more than anything else on this board. Look at this. Solder ball. Solder ball. See these two little solder balls? Where did they come from? That tells me that those probably came from underneath this chip. So I'm going to put the coil array as our top candidate for where this main short is right now. Let's see what chat has to think about it. All right, let's see. All right, a bunch of people. YouTube sub notifications, thumbs down. All right, Tigris speaker amps near TriStar, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's take off the coil array chip, Trinity or Nikki or whatever it's called in the iPhone 7, and see whether or not that's the cause of our short. All right, so we'll go ahead and take that off, because I think that that right now is our leading, like our top candidate. All right, so we're gonna take this off. Let's try to make that a little bit more visible for you guys. All right, let's bring that back on there. Okay, all right. All right, so we're just gonna slide this guy off. All right, let's look at him underneath. Okay, so there he is. Now let's find out, is that the cause of our main short, yes or no? All right, so with the board being pretty hot from just taking that guy off, we are going to maybe have to let it cool down to get a reading, but we're in a hurry. So let's see, do we still have a main short? We do not have a main short. 0.2, and it's going to keep climbing up as this board cools down. So that is the cause of our main short. Why was this guy not getting hot, our coil array? Because the short was either one of these balls were blobbed together, or, and I think or, the short was within this guy, right? So we have cleared our main short. How do we know? Because the multimeter says that, guys, you know, we've cleared our short. But we can't just stick this guy right back on there, because we don't know if our short is actually within this guy. So we have to find out, was the short within the chip, or Was the short the connection of that chip, right? Okay, so this is exactly how I would approach a board where there is a short and it's not creating heat. Why? It's going to have a reason. The reason is there's a big wire. How did this board get to be a big wire? Most likely case here is that the original short circuit was one of the capacitors that Chase removed. And in doing that, and probably in him putting something back, he overheated this area and either overheated the coil array or made a sort of solder spooge short under the chip. How can we figure this out? All right. Can you build a video to this? Can you build a video to this? What are you talking about? All right. Okay, so we are going to find out whether or not the short is within the chip or was it under the chip. All right, so this guy, we remember it was right there. All right, so we'll kind of put it back there and spin the board around so that it matches the XW. So now we're going to measure with our multimeter the chip itself. So how do we figure out where in this chip is main? So let's go back to ZXW and find out an easy spot to measure main and ground within the chip. All right, so as we look at ZXW, we can see that in this chip, with the dot at the chip here at A1, so we're going to count from the dot of the chip A1, that corner, we're going to go over 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to do a test to see if there is high or low resistance, so no short or short, between D1 and D2, right? So we're going to find the dot on the chip, flip it over, and count from the dot. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then measure from the fourth one on the edge to the next one down. And we'll see whether or not there's a main short within the chip. Or, if not, can we reball the chip and reuse this chip? So let's find out. All right, so let's go over here, and I'm going to put my multimeter in ohms mode to kind of measure the resistance between these two spots. All right, so here is the chip. Here is the dot on the chip. And we have to remember where the dot is. It's this top corner. Here's the dot. So we're going to flip it over, and now the dot of the chip is here, right there on the edge with the little triangle. So we're going to measure 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to measure between this guy, A, and B, with the multimeter to find out whether or not there's a short within the chip, or can we reuse the chip? Let's find out. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see if we can take this reading without the chip flying away. And ohms to ground is 0.2 ohms. 0.2 ohms. What does that mean? 0 ohms is a short, right? There is no resistance between these two spots. There's no resistance between those two spots, which means they are connected. Main and ground. Main and ground. They are inside this chip. They are connected. How did it come to be like this? How does a chip like this just go short? And the answer is that is always going to be from heat, right? So your problem is that inside this chip, if we were to, kind of, magically dissolve all of this silver stuff, what we would see is the little collection of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little coils. And they would all be there. One of those coils has been heated up, and it got hot, and it needed to kind of release the pressure, so it pooped out a little solder ball. The same thing that we see going on lots of places on this board that were kind of showed signs of overheating, right? Like right there, we see that capacitor got hot and it pooped out a little solder ball. This capacitor got hot and it pooped out a little solder ball. Well, the same thing happened inside this chip. It got hot inside there, and one of those little coils inside there pooped out a solder ball. And because this chip is so densely surrounded by ground, that little solder ball inside this chip is now touching ground. That makes a big thick wire when you got a blob of solder touching another blob of solder. That's not gonna get hot. It doesn't create a thin wire, it creates a thick wire, and that's why this coil array, which was the cause of the short, didn't show up. My guess is that Chase has probably taken that off before, and then since there's backlight and charging coil, this thing needs to kind of be on there to boot a phone, he probably put it back, not realizing that this was the cause of the short. Or maybe not, I don't know. All right, so now we know the cause of the short. Can we reuse this guy? No, we cannot. So in order to bring this phone back to life, we're going to have to replace it. Now in the iPhone 7, this is just a bunch of coils, so we can replace it. It's replaceable. We can get another one. Now it's going to be hard for us to replace it because what happens when we take this guy off of another board? It's going to get hot on this guy, and it's going to be hard to take it off with hot air without overheating it. So we'll have to be very careful and try to do that. Now just for fun, because I need to go to locker day in just a few minutes, I am curious whether or not this board is going to be able to boot. So right now it's not going to be able to boot because, or it won't be able to connect to USB if it does boot, because I have an open line here at the Tigris coil. So let's see, what do you guys think? See what chat has to say. Let's see what's up with that. All right, interesting. Let's see, yep, shorts. Okay, it was welded inside. Yes, it definitely was. All right, so now let's do a little trick. Who wants to learn a fun trick? So let's look at these guys, right? The inside, let's see if you guys can see this, inside this coil array. Let's just kind of strategize for a minute because I don't have one handy. I mean, I could go find one, but I don't have one right in front of me that I could take off another board, reball, and stick on this board. And this is here for data recovery, and I'm curious to just see whether or not it would boot up. So let's just kind of think for a minute. Let's be creative. What is going on? What is the job of M2800 here? So inside M2800, up here at N2, L2, L3, and N3, is ARC1 LX1. And if we go and look on the schematic and say, what's ARC1 LX1? We'll find that that is part of the speaker amp system. So let's ask a question. Can I boot up an iPhone 7 if I took off the speaker amp chip? So you guys know the speaker amp chip, right? There's a couple of speaker amps on this board. Speaker amp up at the top of the board. There's these speaker amp chips that are by TriStar. Can you boot up a 7 without those speaker amps? Answer, yes, you can. So right now, those speaker amp coils are off the board, so the speaker amps are not going to work. But I don't really care because the speaker amp system is not crucial for booting the phone. All right, what else is going on in here? So also in here is this guy here, VDD main, is connecting to BLSW1LX, backlight coil. And over here, VDD main is connecting to backlight SW2. All right, this is backlight. Can you boot up an iPhone 7 without the backlight circuitry? Yes, you can. You can't see a bright image, but you can peel the back way away, use a light, you can still see it. So do I need backlight to be working to get the data from Chase's phone? No, I don't. I'd like it to be there so that you guys could see, but we don't really need it. Now, last one. Can we just leave off this whole chip? Let's see. Last one, we have VDD main over here and Tigris Buck LX. So if you take Tigris off the board, then that can be problematic, especially in some other phones. Tigris is required at least for USB connection, and it may be in some devices required for the phone to boot up. So let's do a couple of quick things just to see what happens. Let's go ahead and make a wire. So instead of putting a coil in here, I'd like to put a coil in here. I'm just going to make a simple connection. All right, so I'm going to put a wire connecting D5 and B5, or D6 and B6. So let's put a little wire there, and I'm going to put another wire on the board over where the MOSFET is missing. All right, so let's do that. And what do you guys think in chat? Is this how you would check to see whether or not there's anything else going on and try to recover data from this board or not? So we've found our short, we've cleared our short, and now let's cheat a little bit and do a quick experiment. So I'm going to just take a single piece of braid. Here we go, here's some braid. And let's cheat. Let's see, what would chat do? Apple Bumpcaster says bypass. Yeah, let's just kind of do a little bit of a workaround. Not to be a phone again, but just to kind of see. All right, so we'll get rid of ZXW. And we're going to put, let me remember, I got to look at ZXW. All right, if we take out speakers in the system, it will boot. Yes, all right. So we're going to go right down here at the bottom. Let's grab some flux just to check, just to see what's up. And we're going to make a little wire here. We're going to connect, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4th row in, 1, 2, 3, 4th row in, this guy, and then we got to kind of go up in the air a little bit. That guy. And then we might as well connect this. All right, so I have made a tiny little jumper, and let me just use my multimeter to make sure that we are all good on that. Let's see. All right, VCC main is back up to 0.32. That's normal. And let's just make sure nobody's talking to ground over here. Not ground, not ground. Okay, that jumper is done. And now we're going to show you the other jumper that I'm going to make on this board, just for you guys to see. Just a test so that we can kind of see whether or not there's more work to be done, or do we get to go straight to data recovery. All right, over here the MOSFET is missing. Chase has taken off the MOSFET, which makes sense because he was trying to separate VDD main from battery VCC. Well, we're going to put that back together by just drawing a line here to connect battery VCC to VDD main. All right, and that's the kind of stuff that we can explore in more detail at Practical Board Repair School. You should sign up to come spend 5 days with us. It's super fun, and you can kind of get into the details of when you know, like, how can you make these jumpers or not? How do you leave stuff off? We can explore some of that. All right, so now let's go back, and we are going to just make a jumper from battery VCC right over to VCC main, or VDD main. So let's click off ZXW and make that one come true, and then we will see whether or not we can recover data. Or at least I will be able to see, since this phone will not have a backlight. If it does boot up, it may be hard to show you guys, but we will give it our best shot. All right, let's... All right, so you can't just make, random jumpers and jump all the things. That's something that we get asked a lot. You have to do experiments and kind of, work on working phones is when you're learning. That is some advice so that you can figure out, do you even need this MOSFET? Technically, no. But we're going to stick this jumper here anyway. All right. I've got another device that I'd like to stream this week. what happens when you put on the wrong jumper? I'd like to know, maybe you guys know in chat, where are people getting information about how to make a jumper for a 2020 SE with no touch? Because I've got one here on my desk where someone has made the wrong jumper, and I'm curious if there's information out there somewhere where somebody is suggesting to do the jumper wrong. So where is that? All right, now we've got our 2 jumpers, and that is what we need to actually do our test. So we're about to test. Let's quickly make sure with that we still have a good looking healthy VDD main. VDD main is normal. Let's see. Everything seems all right. Ready to test. Now how are we going to do that? Because I didn't bother to set up the hand cam, at least lately. All right, big fan from Brazil. It looks fuzzy. It does look fuzzy. You're right. Let's try to make it look less fuzzy. There we go. Okay, let's see. Let's see if we can set up our hand cam. Will it work? Maybe. All right, now let's see. Hey, Brad, do we have a iPhone 7 screen nearby? Like really nearby that doesn't require backlight, because this phone's not going to have any backlight? Maybe. All right, that's a 70. This one does have a backlight on it, but at least it's a... All right, Brad is going to try to help me find an iPhone 7 screen that we can just shine a light from behind to see whether or not this phone will boot up. I'm going to put my DC power voltage back up to 4 volts. Hello from Bolivia. Everybody is tuning in to see how to find a short that makes no heat. I hope it makes sense. I would love for somebody to translate some of these videos. It was probably could be shorter and simpler. The answer is you got to look for a big wire and figure out why. All right, let's do, all right, so I'm going to plug in a charge port. You think you can come up with a screen? Okay. All right, let's see if we can turn on the hand cam. We'll leave this chip, the culprit chip right there. And let's see, is hand cam still set up? Yeah, there we go. Hand cam, here's our board. Here's our wire that we don't need anymore. All right. So we are going to plug in DC power. And we're going to steal back a charger. Success? All right. Way to go, Brad. Everybody, 3 cheers for Brad. The mysterious Brad. Brad from iPad Rehab, who doesn't like to be on videos. That's going to be my goal this year. I'm going to make Brad do a video. All right, let's see. Thank you from Kenya. Is this all even true? Somebody could be down the street in Rochester, New York, and just say, "Greetings from insert faraway place here," and I would have no idea. No way to know. All right. So what I've done is, let's try to brighten that up. All right, so I've plugged in the screen. I've plugged in a charge port. I've got our little chip off. Now, we won't be able to see the backlight because the backlight coil is off the board. So what we're going to do, Brad has pulled this away. And we are going to take the microscope light off. And we're going to let the microscope light be a backlight of sorts. And we'll kind of put that so it doesn't blind anybody. All right, now we're going to plug in the battery connector. Always do that last so that you don't get into any kind of trouble. And we're going to see what happens. See whether or not we have other things to fix on this board, which might have to wait until later. All right, let's see. All right, we're going to plug in DC power, and now we're going to prompt this phone to boot using the charge port. All right, prompt to boot. And look at that. I see an Apple logo. So that is good news. Look at that. See, we have no backlight, but we can put the little light there. There we go. And let's see, will it boot up? Will it boot up despite all of its sad... There we go! Look at that! Success! We have a path to data. All right, it's good news for you, Chase. You know, to be honest, I don't think that you overlooked anything that is, you know, super obvious, right? It's just like we talked about in class. Most of the time, short circuits are caused by a thin wire, but not all the time. And I think what happened here is that you probably initially cleared the short, and then you probably recreated one, probably up by your caps that you took off and replaced. That probably was the short, and then you created another one. And then as you got frustrated with, you know, I can't find the short, and you're doing more and more to it, and you kind of become a little like free and loose with the heat. I think you overheated your coil array, which caused that short that we just cleared. And then later you went back and probably cleaned up those caps that you had replaced, clearing that short. So I think you probably had a few different things going on. But there you go. This one is ready to recover. So we're going to get all the data off before anything else happens to it. And then we're going to send it back to you. And you can go harvest a coil array, reball it using 138, and you can use one from any iPhone 7. Be really careful with that heat when you take it off. And test before you reball it to make sure you haven't created a main short within the chip like this one. Reball it with 138, put it on there, see if you can bring backlight. And then I'm going to look for you, Chase, to send us a post of this board working with backlight sometime soon. All right, so there you go. That is my approach for how I would work on a board that has a short that I know that I can't find with heat. You can always find the cause of these short circuits. Just use a little bit of logical reasoning. How did it come to be this way? And there you go. All right, that's it for this time. I'm going to go to Locker Day, and you guys can come cheer me on. I'm doing my second triathlon at Rochester, the Rochester Triathlon, on Saturday the 27th, a couple more days, and I will be an official triathlete. All right, got to go practice.